The next step in the process is to look at the costs and the implications. One way to evaluate costs and implications is to look at the strategic options and think about the priorities. Using a simple metric of a plus sign and a minus sign, there were two major decisions that you were to look at and to make as you looked at this case. So we had number one was the resettlement policy, and the other one was transportation specific, the specific method and the specific route to take. So here's the assessment metric. The resettlement policy breaks down into three options. There's land for land, give them a settlement of money, or actually do a fairly detailed community development plan. So we're going to look at those first, the resettlement policy. The money option was basically the option to drop $35,000 per family on these folks. So for the money option, is giving money a simple solution? Yes, it sure is. Economically, is that a clear and bonded investment? Yes. So I would say that this is a good option for them economically. Just give them this money and get them off our backs. I'm not sure if this has an environmental component, so I've placed a question mark there. But does it have a social component? Do these folks know what to do with $30,000? And is this money for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years of income or something? I think that money may be a negative for social concerns. So I've placed a minus sign in the money option under social. What about the land for land resettlement option? Let's assume that this would give the locals a bit of caring, a bit of support, and then find land to replace their land. Again, I'll put question marks in the environmental area just for simplicity's sake so we can focus on the social aspects. In terms of social impact, is land for land a good option in terms of social impact? Think about that. They are not a money-based economy, and they have lived exclusively on this land, so there are some social positives with giving them land rather than giving them money. So there is less social risk providing them land for land than with providing them money for land. Some of the social risks include things like, can we find equivalent land? And can we find it in an area where they're not going to be cultural isolates, so that they're not going to be stuck in a cultural island and they lose their identity? With these thoughts, I guess I would say that this is mixed in that it is better than money for land option, but it might be negative if we cannot find the right land for these people. So I've placed a plus and a minus sign in this regard. What about the community development relocation option? There was like $6 million that they would put toward community development, but that money would come over time. So depending upon how this was implemented, the community development option might be the best option for them socially. So I've put a plus sign there. In terms of cost, it seems to me that this is just the reverse. Land for land is nixed, and community development is a negative. Look good? So I've placed a negative sign in the community development plan economically, and I've nixed the land for the land relocation option. So here we're starting to see some pretty clear trade-offs between these options. Let's take a look at the transportation elements in terms of methods. The options for transportation were to transport the oil by trucks or by pipeline. Which is the better idea in terms of environmental impact, the long-term environmental impact? Probably the pipeline is better. So I've placed a plus sign there and a negative sign beside the truck. What about social impacts? Well, if trucking is chosen, there may be some positive aspects because transportation in the area would be improved, which would seem like a good thing, but there may be some negative aspects with that as well. So the pipeline option is probably neutral as far as social impacts is concerned. So I'm going to go ahead and I've nixed the trucking options because there are pluses and minuses there, and I put an equal sign to as a mark of neutralization socially for the pipeline option. Economics. Which of the two is cheaper, trucks or pipeline? Yeah, well, trucks are probably cheaper with upfront costs, so let's look at upfront costs there. And I placed a plus sign in that area, and I put a negative sign for the pipeline. Now let's look at the routes. There were two routes, the central route and the southern route. What are the trade-offs between the routes? Environmentally, which one is better? Possibly the southern route because it doesn't run through the bioreserve. So I'll go ahead and put a plus sign there under the southern route and a negative under the central route. How about social impacts? Or is that even relevant with the route? Let's think about that. The central route would have more social impacts because it goes through the national park, the main area. That may be more socially positive actually if it brings in more commerce, but it might be negative too because of the trade-offs. The southern route might be neutral in this case. So I put a plus and a minus beside the central with social impacts and an equal sign for neutral under the southern route. Which route would be cheaper? Let's look at this for upfront costs. Yes, the central route is probably cheaper, so I'll put a plus sign there and a minus on the southern route. So now we've worked our way through the assessment metric. And what we've done here is worked our way through this process. It's just one way to consider the actions over the long term and maybe the short term, but it helps you to start clarifying your options when you put them in a simple format such as this. So I would encourage you to look at this in future cases and as you work on your final project.